I am Ojamar Mitchell. I want to welcome you to today's presidential panel on scholarship in a democracy, criminology's ethical imperative. My colleague, Val Jenis, could not make it to the meeting and asked me to serve as the chair and moderator for this panel. I will also be contributing as a presenter. So, what's going to follow next is me channeling Val. She asked me to read some words as opening remarks for this panel, so I'm going to read verbatim what she has written here as her opening comments. So this is me speaking as Val. Thank you, OJ, for subbing in for me. I'm sorry I could not be here in person, courtesy of a canceled flight, courtesy of the government shutdown. I also want to thank Catherine Russell Brown for envisioning this panel and for assembling the panelists who have agreed to focus our attention on scholarship in a democracy. It is an important topic, and I know our panelists will do a fabulous job providing provocative comments to inform our discussion. To frame our discussion, I want to use my time as chair to speak to what I'm calling the foundations of a healthy democracy and good social science, convergence and divergence. I do so to stimulate our thinking about the interdependencies between the two, democracy and social science, criminology in particular, and how threats to one can impact the other. Healthy democracies and social sciences, including criminology, share fundamental commitments to truth-seeking, transparency, and systematic inquiry, but they diverge in their ultimate purpose and operational methods. From my point of view, understanding their overlap and distinctions can illuminate the complex relationship between knowledge production, criminological and beyond, and democratic governance in the US and beyond. At their core, both healthy democracies and good social science require a commitment to evidence-based reasoning. Democracies function best when citizens and policymakers make decisions based on facts rather than misinformation. Likewise, social science, including criminology, has an allegiance to data collection, data analysis, and an honest assessment of what constitutes fact versus fiction. Both systems recognize, at least in the abstract, that truth claims must be subjected to a scrutiny, and that conclusions should emerge from careful examination with an open mind rather than predetermined ideologies. Transparency is another crucial type of overlap. Democracies require an open government, public access to information, and accountability mechanisms that allow citizens to evaluate their leaders' actions. Social science similarly demands methodological transparency, including researchers disclose their data sources, analytic techniques, and I would argue potential biases. Transparency as a form of openness enables both enterprises, democracy and social science, to prosper and self-correct. Without transparency, democracies can slide toward authoritarianism, and social science can devolve into pseudoscience and ideology. Both systems also thrive on pluralism and free exchange of ideas. Healthy democracies encourage diverse viewpoints, minority rights, and robust public debates. Likewise, good social science welcomes competing theories, encourages peer review, and advances through constructive criticism. Whether in academic journals or public forums, the so-called marketplace of ideas is a crucial mechanism for developing and refining our sense of reality and understanding. Now, there are also significant points of departure between these two domains, social science and democracy. Democracy hinges on egalitarian participation, at least in an idealized form. For example, every adult citizen's vote carries equal weight, regardless of social location and expertise. Parenthetically, she adds, I should add, at least in this historical moment, and hopefully despite attempts to interfere with voting rights. Continuing. Social science is meritocratic and hierarchical, insofar as it privileges specialized knowledge and technical competence. There's also a temporal dimensions to consider. Democracies operate in electoral cycles and demand immediate responses to pressing problems. Voters vote with incomplete information. Politicians act decisively, often with incomplete information, to address constituencies' concerns. Social science, in contrast, requires patience. Research takes time. Years or decades may pass before a definitive conclusion emerges, and even then, the conclusions are open to challenge. This temporal mismatch can and does create tensions when democratic urgency collides with scientific caution. Further, democracies must balance competing values and interests, which means negotiation and compromise. Social science, on the other hand, interrogates competing values and interests, acknowledges complexity, and tries to find the truth independent of political interests and express preferences. In the United States, social science tries to do this in a post-truth society in which objective facts are less influential in shaping political debate or public opinion than appeals to emotion or personal belief. This matters for criminology. Ultimately, healthy democracies benefit from good social science, including criminology, and social science benefits from democratic freedoms that protect research integrity, arguably one of the most paramount being academic freedom. From my point of view, the challenge lies in fostering productive dialogue between these domains while respecting their distinctive logics. When democracies ignore the kind of evidence social science produces, it is at the people's peril. When we, as criminologists, ignore threats to democracy, it is also at our peril. I conclude with this. The current challenges to social science and threats to democracy are significant, and the stakes are high. How we diagnose and address these challenges and stakes matter immensely. To use a word in the title of this presentation, it is imperative that we attend to both. I'm sure our panelists will have more to say about it, and I appreciate them being here to do so. That's the end of Val. Now back to me. I'd like to introduce the speakers in order that they appear in the program. I've asked each presenter to keep their comments relatively short, 10 minutes or so. We've had one panelist unfortunately have to cancel their participation due to some traveling issues, so I might be a little generous with that. Might push it to 12, but yeah, okay, all right. So 10-ish minutes. That will leave ample opportunity for you all to chime in, ask questions, raise points that we didn't, and ask for clarification on other points. What am I forgetting? So this isn't meant to be a formal panel presentation. You're not going to see a whole lot of slides and whatnot. This panel was intended to be a discussion. So I hope you bring your energy, bring your comments and questions, and let's have a great discussion. So first up, we have Professor Charles Welford. We'll follow that with Faye Taxman, Anthony Peguero, and as I mentioned earlier, Marva Goodson couldn't be here because of some travel issues, so unfortunately, regrettably. She has comments. Oh, you have her comments?
I do.
Oh, I didn't hear that. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have less time.
Oh, now you have less time. I'm sorry. So 10 minutes, doggone it. And I'll go last, and I will keep my time to 10 minutes. Thanks.
Thank you, OJ, and thank you all for being here. There should be a clicker somewhere. Does somebody have it?
Next to your hand.
Oh, there it is. So my comments, and I have some PowerPoints up just because I didn't want you to have to sit there and look at my face on that large screen for 10 minutes. But my comments are going to come down a level from Val's, which were inspiring and motivating. But I want to talk about our field, criminology, and how we're doing and might do during this very unusual administration. What I'm going to cover very briefly in these 10 minutes is where is the administration relevant to criminology? And in all of these comments, I'm talking about two primary issues: scientific integrity and funding. And in scientific integrity, I really mean things like peer review, making decisions the right way, deciding what's to be funded and what projects might be pursued the right way, and then, of course, the funding. Then I want to talk about ASC. Where are we in this discussion, battle, confrontation now and over the next 38 months? And then I want to talk a little bit about what we can do. You'll find them very modest suggestions. But I find that when any organization I've been in, when it gets in trouble, the first thing to do is to look inside. That means looking inside individually and looking inside collectively. So where are we with this administration? Well, we know the first thing they did was to cancel, pause, totally eliminate a large number of projects. And I'm not going to take much time on this. I know it's familiar to you. But the ones that's really jumped out at me because of my interests was eliminating the police misconduct counting system. I know it wasn't being well utilized, but it had been started, it was growing, it had opportunity to give us great national data on police misconduct. It's been canceled. Anything to do with gender identity, transgender in any federal survey is gone. The instructions have gone out to eliminate those questions, and if anybody uses those data in their work, it's going to not be there, at least during this, probably this administration. TV2, which is self-interest, although I'm not doing anything in Maryland anymore, I've retired. Gary LaFree's major effort to count terrorism, eliminated. They just canceled it flat out. Now they're trying to find private money to keep that going. The death in custody data system, gone. One of the interesting things for me was the elimination of the violent crime reduction roadmap. And it's interesting because it's a 5-page document that was on the website. And what it represented was an effort by criminologists, researchers, and practitioners to come together and lay out everything you need to do to reduce violent crime. And so it went from policing to housing to jobs to improving I mean, I can imagine we would disagree on what's the most important, but I can't imagine anybody would disagree that the 10 items they identify were important things to do. And I couldn't figure out why would they, there was no money involved. It was just promoting this idea. Now, there was some technical assistance that was there. So I went back through the document, and here's a relatively uninformed hypothesis. The word diversity occurs 3 times in the document. Has nothing to do with racial, gender diversity. It's talking about diversity of ideas, but it's gone. In total, about $820 million worth of grants and contracts were terminated, paused, or totally eliminated. No access to NCGRS. If you try to access it now, you can't do it. There's some major organizational changes that have been proposed that I think would be bad for OJP and for the constituent agencies. At the same time, you have to acknowledge that if you're working in Project Safe Neighborhoods, you're going to do very well in this administration. They've increased the budget. They're talking about making it a more central part of the whole BJ effort. Of course, OJP will be reduced in funding by about 10 to 15%. So where are we on the budget currently? Well, you know we have a continuing resolution until the end of January. Spending levels will be at the level they were last year. Question is, will they spend anything? I'll talk about that in a second. But in the House and the Senate, there was some relief. You see the numbers there. Overall, the funding for NIJ and BJS, if the budget was passed in any of these versions, would be a very minor reduction. So in a way, our field and our major funding agencies are in the favored category for the Trump administration. If you were at BLS and saw a 30% cut in staff and funding, if you were at the Institute for Education Science, which has almost been eliminated, you'd be in a much more difficult situation. Who's in charge? Well, we don't know. We do have now finally an Associate Attorney General, and the Associate Attorney General oversees all of the OJP agencies. Stanley Woodard was confirmed about a month ago. He's a lawyer. He was President Trump's counsel in the White House. He has an excellent reputation in this town as a good lawyer. But remember, he has civil rights, civil division, environment. I could go on and on. A third of the agency reports to him in addition to our agencies, OJP. We're still waiting on the others. It's not unusual that NIJ and BJS heads don't get appointed early. A few years ago, I led a study of the National Institute of Justice, and it was about 14 months into new administrations before an NIJ, on average, was headed. But we don't have people to work with, but I think this presents us a real opportunity. What about ASC? What? Well, we don't do policy. In the history of the ASC, the organization has approved 2 policies, we think. They definitely approved a policy opposing the death penalty in 1989, and the organization apparently endorsed the approval of the Equal Rights Amendment, but nobody has any record of it, and we don't know when it occurred or how it happened, so I don't take either of those very seriously. Currently, what the board has done is write a letter. We oppose this, this is bad. It's a good thing to do. It has no effect. There's the letter, I won't go through it. We've done the same thing in 2017 with Trump, and I think it was a better effort. There were committees formed to look at key issues like immigration and crime, terrorism. They wrote papers, white papers. They were sent out, no effect. The Clinton years were a little different. Those of you who were around then know that Janet Reno, then the AG, was very interested in research. She invited us in to meet with her. There was a group of about 20 criminologists who got identified to meet and write white papers for the administration. Laurie Robinson was there as the head of OJP. Things happened. I think part of our problem, and it's only part, is that we do not maintain the standards we have for people in our field within our own organization. And I want to just point to, I only have time for one thing, these meetings. 100% of the papers submitted for presentation at these meetings are accepted. In 1970, when I got my first letter saying my paper had been accepted for ASC, I was so excited. I went home and I said to my wife, look, I got a paper. And over the years, I've learned that we all get accepted. Now, how can that be quality control? Why are our numbers down each year from pre-COVID? Why is it that we have 50 sessions at a time operating, and this is probably the largest group I've seen at any of these sessions? Why is that? I think some of it has to do with quality. There have been various efforts to try to improve the quality. It means peer review for papers. It may mean fewer people attending if they don't get their papers accepted. I don't say there's an easy fix, but I think in our meetings, in criminology, in our internal debates, we have to raise the bar for our organization, the American Society of Criminology, before we will be taken seriously in the broader areas that we want to influence. So what can we do? Individually, a few simple suggestions. If you know somebody has lost their job or their grant, reach out to them. I was in an office once where 36 people, Reagan administration came in, 30 of people in the office were fired immediately. That's a hard time for people. Reach out, say hello. Write to your congressmen and state leaders. The Consortium of Social Science Associations has an excellent handbook that drafts the intro to letters, tells you how to do it, gives you all the addresses. Take an hour a week of your time and devote it to educating our state and federal leaders that you can contact, your representatives. Will it make a difference? It's like the lottery. If you don't play, you can't win. And if you don't try this, if we don't all try this and do it, nothing's going to happen. Collectively, as I've said, we have to have higher standards for our meetings. I think ASC needs to take seriously developing published policy papers. I have ideas on how that should be done, how we can engage the whole membership, so it's not just the executive board speaking, but ASC as a whole. We need definitely greater involvement of members in ASC. It's not just that we don't know what the executive board's doing and we should see stuff. And we need to be involved. And the board and the Constitution and the policies and procedures manuals need to change to not only encourage but require greater membership involvement. And finally, I think we need a presence in DC. Our national office is in Columbus, Ohio. Why? Our executive director was in Lincoln, Nebraska. Huh? I mean, Nebraska's a great place, but we need a representation here. We've tried it a little a few years ago. People weren't satisfied. I urge you to urge the board, people you talk to say now's the time, especially now with this administration, that we have someone here representing criminology. Did I go over? A little bit. I went over, I'm sorry. Thank you all very, very much.
Yeah, I see the clip. Okay, I just want to make sure. All right. Next up, we have Dr. Taxman. Hey, Taxman, come on up.
Thank you. So surprisingly, I don't have any slides. I actually, first of all, I want to thank Charles for giving us a big picture and also kind of helping us focus on what can we do in this environment. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the fact that where we are today is really a product of anti-science climate that we all live in. In my career, I've been shocked to some degree to see the degree to which organizations now basically don't think science is of value, or they're afraid of us. I can tell you, my colleague Ben Mackey and I had a conversation with a judge in a state that we're doing work in, and the judge was basically, well, you're funded by this organization, so therefore you're liberal. Or the judge in the same sentence said, you're from George Mason, and that law school is one of the more conservative law schools, so how am I to trust you? And I think it's that issue about this anti-science climate, the relationship that we have with the actors that we hope will use our research findings to really think about the administration of justice and the quality of justice. So I think this anti-science environment has a really significant impact on how we got to where we are, with, not just with the Trump administration, but also with thinking about how to reform the system. I mean, I think most of us in this room can basically say, you know, we've been working on the same problems. I've been in this field almost 45 years. I'm still doing work in areas that, you know, I did when I did my dissertation. And I think we really have to think about how do we unravel this anti-science climate. So looking inside to scholarship, academia, even now some of the research organizations, I think that we need to really take ownership to the fact that we have postured ourselves sometimes to be superior in our knowledge, to not always be transparent about where our data is from, what we're thinking about, why we came to the conclusions, the limitations of our studies, and in fact, you know, I've been working in the area recently of science translation, and it's pretty obvious that the science translation process is really defined as an academic process to thinking about how do we move studies from a study concept idea to doing effectiveness trials, but we hardly ever get to the effectiveness trials because we're so embedded in the early part of the process. So for example, in the medical science field, there's an article that was published in 2011 that basically documented that it takes about 17 years from when an idea gets formulated in a lab to when it actually reaches doctors and nurses and social workers, to be able to implement. And oh, by the way, they only implement about 20% of what actually comes out. And usually when you have discussions with scientists who work in those fields, usually they're lamenting, why is it that the practitioners aren't using the great stuff we found? Why is it that these practitioners aren't intrigued and they're not doing kind of what we recommend as part of our scientific findings? But I think when you actually look at that 17-year period, a good portion of that is spent on the academic scholarship process, right? We have to come up with an idea, we have to find funding to be able to execute a lot of studies, we have to, do a proof of concept usually, then we get more money to be able to, implement a study, then we have to write papers, and we all know that that process can take several years in terms of getting things out in the field and so forth. And then, oh, by the way, we have to work with our colleagues and hope that other people will replicate the studies. So that takes a good part of that 17 years. And what's missing in that equation is engaging the field in terms of thinking about the relevance and the opportunity that the practitioners or whatever discipline we're working in could actually help us rethink what the research questions might be that might be more meaningful to them. So I really think that our process really does not garner a lot of engagement and support from the field at all. And I think that's something, to, focus in on what Val has charged us with is a way of trying to increase our significance and to maintain some of the integrity is that we really need to rethink how we do our work. And I believe that that begins with engaging the field differently than we currently do. Most often, and I've been an engaged researcher for most of my career, but most often it begins with a process where I have this great idea. I go to an organization and I say, hey, you want to work on this idea with me? And they say yes or no. I've been lucky, a lot of times they say yes, and there it goes. What's been missing from my process, and I've been working over the years to really alter that, is really engaging the field in kind of defining the front end, what are the research questions, but then also engaging people in what are we learning along the way? So we're feeding information back and creating feedback loops so that the organizations can begin to see the value. In most of the practice organizations, you wait 5 or 6 years to give people findings. There's new leaders, there's new supervisors. They're like, okay, this isn't our study, we don't really care. And so I think we really have to find a way to work in the discipline to help people understand what is science, what is the production of knowledge look like, what is the how to use the knowledge in practice. So I'm going to give you a couple principles that come out of what's called the community-based participatory research process that is, being pursued somewhat in primarily the health services and medical field. There's many in our discipline who have looked at some of these processes and have started to engage them, but I think we need to be much more deliberate. So the first one is collaborative partnerships. having a partnership which you begin to develop a good relationship with the organization overall, and you can work through every phase of the research, beginning with the research questions all the way to dissemination and giving, engaging the frontline workers, in this case police officers, probation officers, judges, prosecutors, et cetera, in how to put this in place. So you have to have a foundation, and a relationship is really important. So that means of the 3,000 or so members of ASC, if each of us adopted one organization, we could actually have much more of an impact on the field. The second thing is, in this process, is the participatory process, is people have to have a mutual benefit. They have to see the research as something that's of value to them and that can help deal with their issues that they're confronting in their field. And then, you have to also take the long road and have a long-term commitment. I've worked with one agency over 35 years. I like to say the people who are in charge now, they were my children when we started working together 35 years ago, because they've all kind of grown up. They're in supervisory positions, management positions. But you need that long-term commitment, not just we're going to do this and we're going to do that, but really trying to foster a co-learning, co-production process in which, this mutual benefit is evident to both us as the researchers, but also in terms of what goes on in that organization and what their role and responsibilities are. The other piece is we need a little bit of flexibility in realizing that our research designs should really be much more engaging in the organization. There's a move within criminology to do more qualitative research. I think that's a positive sign because we then can hear the voices of people in the field. And then we need to really be action-oriented, focused on what are the solutions that this community has identified, not just understanding them, right? We can understand something, but we also have to help people really think about what those solutions look like. So, kind of following on to what Charles kind of laid out there is, I think as members of this academy, we have a role, responsibility to really unravel this anti-science climate. I think we have to do this by being very deliberative in engaging the field in the disciplines you're interested in your research, but engaging people much more so on understanding the research process, but also crafting what some of the research questions are. I would recommend to people that they spend a couple years getting to know an organization, not just the leaders, because as we know in our field, most of the time police chiefs, probation chiefs, they're gone within 2-3 years. So you really have to know the leadership of an organization or the front line and really focus on what they feel are the pressing problems. I feel it's really important to spend time with those frontline workers, street workers, and I think it's really important for us to think about, what from their lens can lend to procedurally just practices. Our research processes we need for the scientific integrity, but we haven't helped other people understand what scientific integrity really means. And I think part of the participatory process is to really get us to that level where we're having the field understand why is it important to do interviews with people. Why is it important for them to fix their administrative data that can't really oftentimes answer their own questions? And we can do this if we're really deliberative in terms of thinking about engagement. So I challenge all of us here to really think through what role can we have in unraveling this anti-science climate. And if I went over, I'm sorry.
All right, so next up we have Dr. Anthony Figueroa. He's going to come up, speak to us, and he's also the incoming Vice President of ASC. So welcome to the stage.
Thanks, OJ. My name's Anthony Figueroa, Arizona State University. I'm split. I feel like I have to always share these things of the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice, but also the School of Social and Family Dynamics. I want to thank past President Val Jenis and current President Catherine Russell Brown for this opportunity to talk, but it's also what I give mad respect about is the idea of thinking about representation in these kind of panels. Because there was a little bit of concern, are we all going to talk about the same thing? And it's become very evident we're all not going to talk about the same thing. What I would like to talk about, for there to be good social science, there needs to be good social scientists that are healthy, that are focused, and could do the job. Meaning us to look out for each other in the different situations that we find ourselves in. So the way I'm going to talk about this is start off with administration and then kind of work my way down, and then I see the clock is already ticking, right? So one of my directors in the School of Social Family Dynamics, and I asked him if it was fine for me to share his story, does LGBTQ work, was at University of Texas, Austin, part of an LGBTQ family, felt like they needed to leave. And with that, he brought in, he's our new director, and he brought with that an understanding of the different situations that we're all facing with. So even coming to this conference and the administration, what they have to deal with in terms of us being social scientists, even just foundational, to focus on work, you need to be sustainable, and not all of us are sustainable. So what do I mean by that? Some of us are losing our jobs, and I know Charles mentioned that. People are losing their jobs, people are getting pushed out, redirected, made to pivot their research, even though this is the kind of research that they wanted to do. But also, we at Arizona State University, but a number of other schools, are a minority serving institution. And I know that has been questioned if we can still say that term or not. But the idea of providing a safe and healthy environment is a commitment to the administration. And I genuinely believe that. And with the idea that potential surveillance, potential reporting of things that are not supposed to be happening on campus falls upon administration to protect to who it serves, meaning the students, the faculty, and each other. The idea of there being good social science is the idea of also social scientists being able to do their job. And I very much appreciate the administration and the pressures that they have, not only for their own well-being in terms of trying to figure out how to navigate the system, but in also to protect their students, faculty, but even oftentimes their curriculum, right? And how to think about issues of justice and issues of equity, especially in criminology and criminal justice, and how can that be conveyed? But moving down from that, I've also thought about full professors, right? And the things that they're tasked with. And I'll speak for myself in this aspect. It has been an interesting year reviewing cases. I'd never been informally contacted really before this year. It's a request. I mean, people who are full, they know that you get an email, will you be willing to do this case or not? Because of the work I do, and let's say predominantly looking at, let's say, race and justice, just broadly speaking. I know I'm a school safety scholar, but let's just focus on that part. And I've had, I don't know, this is something that comes up and I often get teased about, but on average, I'll do about 12 reviews a year. And I had 4 reviews where chairs wanted to talk to me, and these are from states that have very clear and explicit rules on how DEI, race and justice, gender and equity, LGBTQ, gender, all these things should not be part of the curriculum. They are being surveilled. This should not be considered, and this is the informal conversation I'm having with the chair, considered in a review case, so don't make note of it, even though this person's work is completely about race and justice, gender equity, gender identity, so on and so forth. And again, how do I think about good social science being done by good social scientists and making and ensuring that we look out for each other, and I try to navigate that, right? Try to emphasize the things that will highlight their scholarship. Now, that's one of the many things, right, in terms of what full professors have to do. That goes by fast. So because of that, I mean, the idea of mentoring, the idea of, and I think this is the first time as a full professor, like, what am I telling students in this moment to pursue their PhD? And what kind of job are they looking for, and what kind of identity or what kind of pursuit they think of as crime and justice, broadly speaking. And I've come to appreciate with full professors, as I could speak one as one, I'm very thankful for that, the challenges for associates and assistants to get promoted. Now, there are some places to get promoted from associate to full, you have to get grant funding. It is required. Now, these are in bylaws, it takes time to do bylaws. So how do we, as social scientists, try to support our colleagues where grant funding is gone, data is often pulled down, as a number of you talked about, and to ensure that they can do their work and contribute to providing a context for them to pursue equity in their work. And that's on us to look out for each other and try to consider that as in a pandemic, and this is me saying this, I'm not representing ASU, that's something that one of my directors talked about. Anyway, so, and the reason that I'm saying that is that this is a climate where we're all being scrutinized, and we need to understand and support each other that we're all being scrutinized. And there's some of us that are being more scrutinized at a higher degree. And we need to appreciate as colleagues. I may understand some of us may not be under that kind of surveillance, may not need to pivot our research agenda, may not need to get some of these things. But a number of our colleagues are thinking about, can I keep my job? Can I get promoted? Can I even get a job? And then thinking about the regional contexts that some of us have to endure. And it's been here at this conference, and I think just because of who I am and the kinds of things that I do, it's been humbling to hear people trying to do good work, let's say around immigration and crime, and immigration and justice. And oftentimes the work we do are reflective of our own experiences. I won't go down that rabbit hole if that's good or bad or if that's subjective, and that's what criminology or criminal justice should be. But I am humbled by the idea that they're trying to do work around this while being concerned about their children potentially being detained and potentially being deported while trying to do this work because they're in a state that ICE and Border Patrol is a constant presence of where they're at. And I've come very humbled by that experience, meaning those kinds of stories, and understanding that all of us are working in the same context. So these are the things that I've thought a lot about, and I know we were given a broad chance of how to think about the work, meaning social science, but it's hard for me not to think about the challenges that social scientists are facing in terms of getting the work done for sustainability, but ultimately what we got in this for, the pursuit of equity and justice through research and evidence-based research to inform policy. And I'd like to think that's the things that we've been talking about here, right? But that takes us as a collective, in my interpretation, everybody's been talking about here, us as a community, not just ASC, but us as criminologists, and how do we support each other in the pursuit? Because we are also these communities, right? Like, we are part of these communities. I think a lot about my colleagues in Chicago who routinely are trying to think about their students, not even sure of the safety of their students, as ICE just randomly picks up people, right? So these are the things for me that I would like for us to think about if we're in the pursuit of good social science, that we need to be supportive of each other as social scientists. So, thank you.
So the theme for today is channeling other people who aren't here because of travel-related issues. We're going to welcome Faye Taxman back up to the stage to read Marva Goodson's comments?
Yeah.
Correct? Okay. Here we go.
So I'm going to follow OJ and just really read what Marna sent me. She has 4 major points. The first one is federal guidelines and budgetary restraints do more than limit the topics and language permissible in research. They reshape its purpose by determining whom research serves. In narrowing the possibilities for inquiry and critical evaluation, sweeping shifts in federal funding is determining what stories get told, which populations are studied, how communities respond and participate in the knowledge building process. That's her first point. Her second point is us, scholars who have devoted our careers to study marginality within the criminal legal system, are facing alarming new challenges. Funding disruptions require creative reframing of research problems, the risk of harassment, such as being placed on wait lists, doxxed, or accosted in academic spaces. And she notes that's growing. I can give my own little personal experience here. I had an NIH grant that after the administration started, we were told to review the grant and get rid of certain words and concepts. So we had a 1,000-page grant for NIH, and we spent a considerable amount of time having to do that. Her third point is communities experience heightened systematic inequality, oppression, and criminal legal contact have the greatest need for rigorous, actionable data. Addressing this need requires a multifaceted strategy that includes identifying and advancing mission-driven funding sources, advocating for public access to data, protecting academic freedom for scholars, conducting community-engaged criminological research to solve problems and sustain relationship, and proposing empirically sound policy solutions. Her last point is that funding guidelines shape not only what topics are prioritized, but also who received these opportunities. And that has the collateral impact of who gets trained as scientists and who pursues a career in scholarship. So programs and fellowships that historically supported and diversified the pipeline of social scientists have faced cuts and have been sunsetted, such as the Ford Fellowships, Robert Wood Johnson initiatives. This trend effectively narrows the diversity of perspectives and expertise in our field, constraining innovation and the lens through which crime, harm, and victimization are studied. Inevitably, the academic community will see a significant decline in scholars who are deeply rooted in the very types of research now experiencing disinvestment. Such a shift endangers the diversity of scientific inquiry, threatens the long-term capacity to train future generations of scholars who reflect and serves the greater need of a pluralistic society. So this is from Marva.
Thank you, Marva.
That was good.
And
Now, OJ.
hello again. Waiting for the slides to queue back up, and while I'm waiting for the slides to queue up, I want you to notice that I didn't put these slides on my university's template letterhead. These are my comments. I'm not here representing my institution. I'm not here representing ASC. These are my comments. I mention that because what I'm going to say is provocative, potentially. I think it's fairly obvious, but I think for some people it might be provocative. And in the title here, I mention these comments are from a race scholar's perspective. And I'm just going to tell you my thesis at the beginning, so you're not wondering what the punchline is later. My thesis is our research is not under attack because it's weak methodologically, theoretically, analytically. Our research is under attack, and that's the reason why we're having this conversation, because it exposes the inequalities they want to hide, it exposes the mechanisms used to generate and exacerbate those inequalities. And that is the fundamental reason that our research is under attack. Okay, with that, let's get going. So here I said I'm essentially a race scholar. That's a bit inaccurate. More broadly, I have 3 themes. And I'm going to go through these themes very quickly because it'll help you understand how I came to this conclusion that our research is under attack because of what it finds and what its implications are. So the first area of my research is drugs and crime. I think I'm well known for reviewing the evidence on the effectiveness of different types of incarceration-based drug treatment programs and whatnot. But the key idea that I take from this area of research is the social construction of crime problems. My second area is courts and sentencing, particularly in recent years, with the focus on prosecutorial decision-making and how it can be leveraged for good, fairness, effectiveness, or it can be used in other ways that exacerbate pre-existing disparities. So this is an article I wrote with Nick Peterson on some of these issues. Continuing, my last area of research is the one I started off with. It's race, ethnicity, crime. And the key insight here is the justice system often has, but not always, disparities that disadvantage minorities. Shocker. Another example of that type of research. But the key thing here is, if you look at these areas collectively, they examine how discretion, inequality, institutional power shape justice outcomes in various ways. A lot of this research has become very difficult to conduct. It's become difficult to conduct because the government's defunded certain topics. It's made it difficult, if not against state law, to discuss certain topics. And I want to emphasize that part. Much of what we've talked about thus far has been about federal administration, Trump administration. But this effort actually started in the states. Republican governors and legislatures in those states, like in the state of Florida, where I spent a lot of my career, made it essentially unlawful for professors to discuss certain topics. I think that's a very important point. And this shifting stance toward social science, criminology in particular, has fostered a particular climate of apprehension that affects not only what can be studied, but how it can be studied. For example, if your data isn't available to you, you have to change how you're going to study it. In recent years, we've seen efforts to defund and suppress research examining racial and ethnic disparities, to dismantle diversity and inclusion initiatives, and to stigmatize academic discussion of systemic inequality. The result is a chilling effect that reaches beyond universities. It shapes the kinds of questions scholars ask, again, limits access to data, and subtly pressures researchers to avoid politically sensitive topics. Paradoxically, these restrictions target the very subjects, race, ethnicity, discretion, justice, that demand scrutiny in a healthy, multicultural, multiracial society like ours. For example, my research on prosecutorial decision-making examines how discretion, often shielded from public accountability, contributes to unequal outcomes across racial and socioeconomic lines. Yet federal agencies have been reluctant to fund research in this domain, even as prosecutorial discretion has been weaponized in a partisan fashion at the national level. If you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. Charging decisions have become flashpoints in these partisan debates. They demonstrate both the power of prosecutors and the dangers of leaving that power unchecked. In this sense, the federal government's disinterest in supporting prosecutorial research is itself a form of political decision-making, with profound implications for justice and fairness. The same paradox applies to research on race and justice. efforts to suppress research on racial disparities, whether through funding cuts, political intimidation, bureaucratic interference, demonstrate why this research is indispensable. These actions reveal the ongoing tensions between democratic ideals and the exercise of democratic power. When elected leaders use the authority granted to them by the people to suppress inquiry into inequality, they erode the very foundations of democracy itself: transparency, accountability, and evidence-based governance. In this sense, the federal assault on race-focused and justice-related scholarship is not merely administrative inconvenience, it is a threat to the very infrastructure of this democracy. These developments raise pressing ethical and methodological questions for criminologists. How do we construct meaningful research when the data are withheld? Funding streams are politicized, and open discussion of systemic inequalities are stigmatized. One response is to cultivate resilience through institutional and scholarly networks that safeguard intellectual independence. Another is to diversify funding streams, seeking state, local, and philanthropic partnerships. Perhaps most importantly, criminologists must reaffirm their collective commitments to studying the uncomfortable questions that lie at the heart of democratic self-examination. Are we who we claim to be? Are our justice institutions reflective of the principles of equality, fairness, and accountability? Thus far, what I've emphasized are issues that are of academic interest. What I haven't talked much about in the context of my research is the fact that I've served as a consultant for the U.S. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division in their patterns and practice investigations for about the last decade or so. In fact, we were queued up at the end of last year to investigate what I think is the most egregious case or agency just disregard the Constitution of the United States. And if you know about Rankin County, you'll know what I'm talking about. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, I encourage you to read the New York Times and just do a search on Rankin County and have fun. You're going to read a lot. The start of this investigation started with the torture of two black men by deputies in this sheriff's office who broke into a house without a warrant, conducted a drug raid. That drug raid included sexual assault of one of the men, both of the men, excuse me. They were tased repeatedly. One of the men had a gun shoved into his mouth. The officer apparently didn't know it was loaded. It fired, and it almost killed a person. This actually happened in the United States in 2023. I'm not talking about 1980 or 1880. I'm talking about 2023. This led to the federal government opening an investigation into the Goon Squad. That was what they were called. And this investigation and the investigations that ran concurrently, some of them in the media, found that tasers were being used repeatedly without being recorded. So this is what I'm talking about, patterns and practices. And some of these stories are just crazy. The headline here is a quote, "They beat me like a slave." This actually happened. Not long ago, but apparently it's still ongoing. And just when you thought you heard it all, this is the one that just threw me over the edge. The sheriff in this county is using incarcerated people as if they were slave labor. This is hearkening back to convict leasing. This is happening today. Remarkably, the current administration, when they came into office, when they were inaugurated, said, "No, sir, we're not going to investigate Rankin County or any other place." And in fact, all those investigations people like me have worked on over the years, now we're just going to walk away from those agreements. We're going to walk away from those agreements. So all that research, all that work I've done over the last 10 years, flushed down the toilet. I want to link this to what's going on in social science research, because it's part of the same political process. The federal assault on social science is part of a larger project that seeks to roll back civil rights gained by minorities, and it's an abdication of the federal role in protecting minority rights. This is not two different things. This is one and the same, as far as I'm concerned. When viewed in this way, the government efforts to suppress research like mine, it does so intentionally and purposefully to weaken the evidence base that such investigation and inquiry that would support engaging in reform. In other words, when social scientists are prevented from studying racial inequality and justice itself, the justice system itself loses one of its most vital tools for self-correction. The federal suppression of race and prosecutorial discretion research therefore strikes at the very moral foundation of democracy. It impedes our ability to determine whether we live up to the principles we claim to hold: equal protection under the law, blind justice, prosecution without fear or favor. All of these things are in question. To be a criminologist at this moment creates an ethical imperative. Our research is not only about understanding patterns and practices and institutional behavior, it's about testing the health of our democracy. When political actors attempt to silence or defund our research, we have an ethical duty to resist. We need to find new data sources, as I mentioned. We need to organize in various ways. We need to use all of the available personal, professional levers we have to fight, not only for our research, but for the democratic principles that allow us to do our research in the first place. We cannot theorize our way out of these problems. We cannot collect better data. These are partisan political activities, and we need to respond in kind. I'm not going to go through all this because I want to get to your questions, but I think you get the gist of what I'm saying. Our research is under attack because of what it finds about power inequality and how inequality is exacerbated and generated. These are political mechanisms and goals, and if we're blind to that, if we think we're just going to do better research to get out of this situation, I think you're fundamentally misguided. So I'll end it there. And I'll do a little switch here. So I go from presenter to moderator. Thank you, thank you. Okay, so let's get to your question. Who's got a burning question they want to ask one of these panelists? Don't ask any Val questions or Marva questions because they're not here, and I'm not channeling Val anymore today. What do you have? I heard a lot of interesting ideas. Oh, come up to the mic. Well, you know, it's so bright that I have a hard time seeing you, so if you're raising your hand, it's not going to work very well.
Hi, Karen Feinberg, Feinberg Consulting, Harvard University affiliated. I was thinking about one of your last points around finding new data sources, and I was just thinking, and that tied to funding. And I wonder if there's a movement almost that can be created to develop new funding outside of the Fed government, for instance, right now. For instance, there's a whole movement around systemic investing that is trying to bring different funding mechanisms together on behalf of social change from a systems point of view. It's sort of nascent, but it's growing. And those that defend democracy that have money. And I wonder if there could be a group that could develop new funding streams. That would be a whole separate initiative so that this kind of work can continue without this. I mean, there's always politics everywhere, but it's just a thought that came to mind.
Okay. First of all, are the mics turned on over here? I can't see you, so you're going to, yeah, they're on, good. So I'm going to sit down so this feels more informal. And I don't think that question was necessarily meant for me. I think many people can speak to this question. So.
I think, it's a good idea, but the question that we have right now is who? Because, we're in a very unusual environment where even the foundations, like Ford Foundations, the MacArthur Foundations, Soros Foundations, all on the liberal end, but then if you actually look at the Koch brothers or, some of the foundations that have come out of technology, they're all shying away from these issues because of the climate and the fact that they don't want to alienate, particularly this administration. So I think it's hard to envision that there could be, outside forces to create that. On the other hand, I think we have a responsibility to talk to our senators. I mean, picking up what Charles and, OJ are basically saying about civic action, talking to them about, what do we lose when NIJ does not have grants or OJP doesn't do demonstration projects or the National Institute of Health can no longer do research on Alzheimer's or, things like that. I think, taking that civic role is important because, all these things are being torn apart with people not having a big enough voice about what the impact is.
What I meant to say, besides these foundations, just briefly, are individuals, net worth individuals, and folks like that that are maybe out of that funding stream radar. So that's it, from the entrepreneurial lens, thinking along those lines. So just
There was a session yesterday on this topic, excuse me, and a representative from Arnold Ventures was here, and he spoke about the efforts that Arnold has made to pick up on projects that were terminated just before they were finished, and they needed a little bit of money to finish it. So that's a, but then the question went to that representative, what about other foundations? What's going on there? And the answer, quite frankly, I think, is the following. The big cuts have come in areas like Alzheimer's research and cancer and all the health things that have happened. The big cuts in research have come at education and labor statistics. So that in the rest of the government, that's why I said in my brief remarks, we're kind of the favored area. They look at us at this point and say, look, the funding is going to be a little better or about the same. What are you worrying about? But and Faye and I were talking about this before the session, there's a real possibility they won't fund anything anyhow. Or we'll have somebody running these agencies, I don't want to use a name, but many names come to mind, who will have an agenda that we'll look at and say, what in the hell are they doing? So I like the idea. I think we're competing with much bigger problems. But I would say there's lots of money to support crime research. And it's at the state level. It's in the foundations that police departments have. There are lots of places that I've gone over the years that you can find money to do what, not maybe always what you want to do, but still work that's credible and important. And we may have to shift that focus if NIJ doesn't work out. Sorry.
Go right ahead.
Thank you all. I'm Carolyn Close. I work for the San Francisco Police Department. I have a question to all the panelists about speed. So you all talked about collaboration, and in my role, I'm able to bring academics in, but there's a speed issue working with academics. I need an answer in max 4 months. So I wanted to know, in the spirit of collaboration, like, can you speak to how can academics actually change or manipulate their speed to answer some real world questions in a real setting context?
Well, I think actually Val spoke to this in her comments about the temporal disconnect between research and some of the questions it's supposed to address. I think that's a fundamental problem that is just inherent in many ways to the academic enterprise. But if San Francisco Police Department wants answers faster, they need to not just partner with research institutions, they need to hire people, hopefully internally like yourself, who can do the research more quickly. Because, you know, professors are busy. You probably need a full-time consultant or researcher to address those questions if you want it in that time frame. But I'll turn it over to you.
Well, I mean, I think this goes to what I was trying to point out, which is that the academics and the scholars in the field need to engage with practitioner organizations, and our field needs to value that in a way. I mean, I've been in lots of discussions over the years where, you know, people come up for tenure and, you know, they may not have had a certain number of publications, or they're doing work in a certain area, and people sit around the table and basically say, well, they're just not meeting our academic standards. On the other hand, they've had impact in the community in ways that we should be impressed with. And I think that, you know, the speed issue is one about us internally looking at what we value. And if we value dealing with procedural justice issues, dealing with some of the inequalities that, you know, others here have talked about, then we should value it when people are going through the ranks of academia. And I think the best way to deal with the speed issue is to find those researchers who are willing to work under those circumstances, or to start a relationship with an academic department, so there's graduate students or others who could actually help on some short-term projects.
Can I jump in?
Go ahead.
Okay. I think when I hear that question, I think it's a paradox. It's a little bit of a tension. So I think what's fundamental for the process of science is peer review. And when you think about it, starting off with IRB, and then even with publishing and getting research out there in the peer review process, that has become a growing challenge. In terms of reviewing is going to take longer. And the idea of speed, and this is the thing I think what you're speaking to in terms of what's hard for me, is sometimes you find these scholars who are on social media, going on TV, who are not in their lane, just promoting research that they may not be experts in to get more information out there. And that's sometimes a tension I feel that in the pursuit of speed and getting information out there to say that science is important sometimes is a little bit of a conflict.
Good afternoon. My name is Natasha Pratt-Harris. I'm a professor at Morgan State University. I just realized I'm looking at my department chair, Dr. Charles Welford, when I was an undergrad at University of Maryland. I'm like, wait a minute, that's Dr. Welford. I have a question for the entire panel, but I just wanted to say thank you to Dr. Welford. I was a first-generation American college student. You supported me in some significant ways, but I'll share when I talk to you one-on-one. I want to thank you for that. And today, his presentation spoke to who he was 35 years ago. Same person from that time. The question I do have for the entire panel is, if you can direct us to the history of past presidents who have engaged in a moment like what we are experiencing now in 2025 to respond. Dr. Welford talked about making certain we check in with federal employees and others, people who've lost grants. Other examples historically of, I call it resistance, because you can resist by supporting your colleagues and friends. So that's my question. Thank you.
Well, you're the historian.
I'm the
here.
historian.
Yeah.
I'm afraid, well, in ASC, I would say people like Frida Adler. She was remarkable during the time when Reagan was in office. Laurie Robinson has been a member of ASC. There are people who have been very active, but for the most part, I think our organization has resisted getting involved politically actively. And let me give you an example I was going to use. How many of you know Alan Walker?
Oh, wow.
So Alan Walker was one, thank God. Maybe two or three, four, five. Okay, thank you. Alan Walker was a faculty member at Old Dominion University, and they wrote a book that was qualitative research looking at individuals who were attracted to minors sexually, but didn't engage in sexual activity with minors. Maybe looked at pictures, but didn't engage. And they wrote this book, and Fox News picked it up, somebody else picked it up. All of a sudden, Alan Walker, this assistant professor at Old Dominion, was national news and under attack. The Division of Queer Criminology drafted a petition, circulated it for signature by many in this organization. My recollection is they got very few signatures outside of their division. I was asked to sign it, and frankly, I didn't. I thought there were parts of it that went too far, but I did write to the president of the university and condemn this activity. Good or bad research isn't an issue here. The issue is academic freedom, the fact that their work was well documented. And so what happened? They resigned rather than face termination. Things have worked out fine. Alan's at St. Mary's University in Canada now and has a better job than he probably had before, than they had before, pardon me. But we did really very little to protect that individual at that time. And I doubt if we're doing very much now. I'm not on the board. I don't know all the things the board are doing, but I doubt that we're doing the kinds of things Anthony was suggesting we do and that OJ was suggesting. But I think we should be. What did we do in Alan's case? It looks to me, again as an outsider, we said to them, oh, write an article for Criminology about all the hate mail you got. And so there was a paper, where the person under attack is writing about and interpreting the hate mail. I'm not sure where that ranks on the Maryland scale of scientific rigor, but that's what we did. We didn't come to defend the person. We didn't stand up for academic freedom. As an organization, we said, oh my God, isn't that terrible? It's my impression. I hope I'm wrong. I hope there was more going on. I'm pretty sure there wasn't.
Well, we're about at time, but I wanted to see if there's any more burning questions before we adjourned. No? Going once? All right, well, thank you all for your attendance. Appreciate it.